My topic here is literary studies to cultural studies today. And the purpose of this particular topic, of course, is quite understandable. Understandable because all of us, in fact, have experienced one or two things with regard to either our syllabuses or research topics today. There's always a certain kind of a conflict between the old timers and the young generation today. And even when we look at the syllabuses of yesterday or during the times when we were doing MA, and if we juxtapose those syllabuses beside the ones that we are doing today, you will find significant differences arising between both the syllabuses for the reason that the disciplines of all areas in fact have changed not only drastically but almost unbelievably. And in today's course, I want to just throw some light on how and why such change has taken place. And the talk also will trace the history of English studies and how literary studies, in fact, has changed so much and how it used to be in the past. And what we are doing today is not merely literary studies, but it is largely certain kind of cultural studies where the scope of what we are doing has in fact changed immensely. I want to share with you a simple experience before I start with my course of talk. When I completed my MA and when I was working in a college, we had to make some appointments, and I was sent to Bangalore University to do this campus interview. And we managed to select one candidate who appeared to be pretty okay. And when he came to the department, there was this usual sharing of experiences as to how it was in the department, because I happened to be the alumnus of the same department, and this guy, in fact, was fresh from the department. And I was quite curious to know like how he had understood my teachers who taught me for 2 years, and I had held all of them in high esteem, and I was curious to know how he had understood them. Surprisingly, the response he gave to my query about my teachers was not only disappointing but somewhat harsh. He said, teaching in fact is not happening the way it has to, because these teachers in fact are only performers, but what is important today is inducing critical thinking in people. But the kind of teachers that I had, in fact, were not only good for me, personally speaking, I had actually become inspired so much by my teachers that I wanted to become like them. So there is such difference now between me and this guy who were taught by almost the same teachers, but the perspectives that we had about the department, in fact, were almost incomparable. And the reason for this kind of change in the perspectives between two people who come from two different time segments is that both of us belong to different traditions. And when I did my MA, our syllabus, in fact, was very much like any old time syllabus, and all that we had to do was different kinds of literatures. When it was English department, it was 100% literary studies. And today, I want to just draw your attention to what exactly is literary studies and what we normally do in literary studies and how research used to happen in the past. And here we also have some responsibility to do a little bit of research about what kind of research has so far happened and what kind of theses have been submitted to the English departments across the country. And if we trace the history, you will find lots of differences. For example, if you consider maybe a thesis that was submitted to English department maybe in the 90s, the titles would normally be a critical appreciation of John Donne's poetry, a critical appreciation of Andrew Marvell's poetry, an analysis of Thomas Hardy's novels. And these titles, in fact, were not treated with disregard then. But if you approach anybody today and if you propose to do PhD with a title of this kind, and if you approach any teacher today of any department, normally you will be treated with utter disregard, because today's scenario has changed so much that the words like critical appreciation or analysis, these words don't reflect research. They are not supposed to be treated as the words of research.
Sorry for the interruption, sir. One of the participants, Praveen Kumar, has to mute your audio. Thanks.
Yeah. The problem that we are talking about here is, if I have some candidates approaching me with some topics of this kind, I would want to first tell the candidate that there is no research in the words analysis and critical appreciation, because these words in fact don't have any value today. And research today in fact has actually taken a completely different shape, and we don't normally deal with these kind of titles anymore. But how come the titles in the past were regarded with a lot of respect in the past, and why is it that the people of today don't respect such kind of research? It is exactly that particular area I'm going to touch upon in the first part of the talk today. There is a reason for this kind of old-timer approach to literature. There is, of course, a significant reason as to why people would be satisfied with giving a reading to 4 or 5 novels of an author, and they would manage to come up with some appreciation of those novels in about 150 or 180 pages, and that would be considered as research. All that they had to do was to simply comment on maybe the plot, characterization, and maybe the language used, the narrative strategy. And these things in fact were standard tools that were actually used in the past to understand English literature in the past. But today, the scope of English literature in fact has not remained the same, and not just English literature. Generally speaking, if you're talking about any literature for that matter, the scope of literatures in fact has never remained the same, and there's nothing like a boundary that we can normally draw for any discipline, because all the boundaries have now become completely endangered, and there's nothing like a boundary anymore. We are simply pushing boundaries. And anything can become part of literature today, and it is such scenario that we are actually witnessing today, unlike before. But in the earlier times, people were doing research which in fact was very standard, and there was not much of a difference in the titles that they would come up with, and all titles would look very similar to one another except for the authors that they had taken up for scrutiny. And that kind of research was actually honored then for a specific reason, and it is that reason that I want to bring your attention to. We'll understand what kind of history literary studies has. It has a very interesting history. When we do a survey of the history of literary studies, we normally go back to the 19th century, because it was then that English literature was actually given a special privilege. It was supposed to be treated with a lot of respect, because English literature then was being produced only by some elite class. And there was also a compulsion imposed upon the people of the society that in case anybody wanted to produce any literature, that had to be done only by some specific minority of the society who actually had such tradition of producing literature, and only such people could produce literature, and the rest of us were only the recipients. And we did not really have any right to produce literature on our own because we did not really have the experience and the expertise required for the production of art or literature, because there was something called purity that was attached to the production of art. And it is exactly this particular point that I want you to understand. When you are talking about literature and when you are talking about literary production, the craft of literary production was attached to a word called purity. And because of the word called purity that was attached to this craft of art and the craft of literature, people did not take chances with it, and it was left only to the responsibility of a specific minority. And this specific minority, in fact, were always the people in the ivory towers who were privileged a lot, and they were the ones who would produce literature. And studying literature, in fact, was also supposed to be treated as a professionalized art. And here we are looking at a significant development, especially during the times of F.R. Lewis, who came up with a proposition called professionalization of reading literature. Professionalization of reading literature means you need to know how to understand literature, because literature then was treated as a pure linguistic entity. And literature was supposed to be treated only as a linguistic entity, and the production of meanings from your reading had to happen only by way of understanding what was there before you, and what you had before you was just the text. So there are three things that matter in the art of reading, that is the text before you, and the words that are there before you, and you. So the reader, in fact, will come up with the meanings depending upon what he understands from the words that are present before him. Because the art of reading here, in fact, was being treated purely on the lines of science then. So the point that I'm trying to make here is F.R. Lewis and others who are his contemporaries made this art of reading literature a professionalized art, because they had to somehow construct a specific identity for themselves in the university setup, because that was the time when industrial revolution was happening very rapidly, and there was a need for creating a lot of individuals who were literate enough to know about the machines. So education was becoming democratized, and education, in fact, was spreading a lot in England, and there were a lot of young people who could read and write. But there was a curious development simultaneously in England, and that curious change here is these individuals who were literate enough actually were not expert enough in understanding a complex literary text. They could read and write. They could read about machines, and they could manage to operate the machines in the industries that they were working in, but their actual capacity of reading could not be extended to understanding a complex literary text. And this is where F.R. Lewis comes into picture. He wanted to give specific training to the people who were interested in English literature by way of giving them some training about how to read literature. So in this art of reading literature, the students were given specific instructions. When you have a literary text before you, the first thing you have to understand here is, do not go by any bias. You cannot give meanings to the text on the basis of any of your personal biases. And you don't have to worry also about who created the text. So the text that was there before the readers was completely decontextualized. The text, in fact, did not have to be treated as a an artifact that was produced by an individual who represented some culture. I repeat, the text that the readers then were reading did not have to be treated as an artifact produced by a writer who represented some culture. Instead, the text had to be placed in a vacuum and it had to be understood only on the basis of the words that were there before the reader, which means no extra identity for literature. Literature was all about language, and the focus of your reading had to be concentrated only upon the language that was there before you, and the appreciation that you would come up with for the book that you're reading had to be focused only on the appreciation of the language, which means diction, syntax. There was absolutely no scope for semantic interpretation of the text. It was all the syntax. This was the time when literature actually became part of universities as a course that was being offered for a degree. And this art actually was introduced in the universities for one more reason, and that reason here is very interesting. When industrial revolution was happening, all the universities in fact were focusing themselves on the utility aspect of the disciplines that were being offered. Utility aspect, meaning if students flock into a particular department to do a particular degree, they in fact had to be given clear-cut information about how useful the course would actually be for them when they walked out of the department after maybe 2 years or 3 years after the completion of their course. And because the utilitarian concept became part of university setup then, it was important and imperative for English department also to prove itself to be equally useful, just like the science departments. What we do is also scientific, what we do is also useful, because we are creating experts who can understand literature. And this particular aspect of reading literature was introduced by F.R. Lewis, and this became part of English departments, and it survived for a lot of time. And it still survives. If you closely observe, there are many people who in fact have a lot of faith in the old time treatment of literature, and they don't normally digress from the text, and they would actually be very happy in understanding literature only on the basis of what they have before them, instead of trying to go beyond the text or go around the text. Text mattered to the people then, and text matters even to some people today, and they are the ones who in fact can be treated as the old timers, who actually respect the text precisely for its purity. And people like F.R. Lewis believed in one more thing. The notion of the text depended upon something called unity, centrality. Unity in the sense the text holds the meaning, and it is the writer who actually is authoritative enough to give you the meaning, and it is the authorial intention that matters. And being the reader, all that I have to do here is to understand what the author intends to do. I don't have to worry about any hidden meaning. I don't also have to worry about any associated meaning either. The only meaning that I should be able to infer from my reading of any text was and is only to arrive at the authorial intention. So, F.R. Lewis's practical criticism, in fact, has one simple recommendation, and let's understand what that recommendation here is. You don't have to think too much about the text by way of digressing from the text, because you are going to do the text a lot of injustice if you digress away from the text and stick to the text. The text has something called unity, which means it holds the meaning there. It holds the meaning very much in its center, and we, being the readers, have to in fact understand the text by getting at what the author intends to say. So, it is the author who constructs the meaning, and the author, in fact, is very important for us. And any text for that matter has to be understood only from the viewpoint of the author. So, when we look at literary studies, any literature that we teach in the classroom, according to F.R. Lewis's criticism, has to be taught only on the lines of what the author means by what he has written. And our curiosity here is, what makes people like F.R. Lewis say this? And what is it that F.R. Lewis, in fact, is trying to say by mentioning so much about authorial intention? And why is it that he takes objection to digressions from the text? And why is it that he is making it mandatory for the reader to only focus on the language part? Simple reason here is, literature in the earlier times was understood as nothing but language. Literature in the earlier times was understood only as creative expression, that's it. And when you are talking about creative expression, it is nothing but creative use of language. And F.R. Lewis, in fact, went only by that, and you have several reasons for it. One of the major reasons here is, when we talk about literary studies, at the political level in England, there were a lot of educational reforms. And one of the reforms that happened, especially at the time of Industrial Revolution, was the government made it mandatory for the people of England to educate their children compulsorily. And the mandate, in fact, was so strict and strictly imposed that in case any parent failed to educate his kid, it would lead to strict punishments. And because there was a lot of force from the government to educate the children, suddenly there was a noticeable increase in the number of students who would flock into colleges and universities for education. And these students were taught for a specific purpose. The government needed more young people who were in a position to read about the machines on which they would be working, and any degree that was being offered then had to facilitate the art of reading about machinery, for which a crash course or a diploma was being offered for the students. At this point of time, suddenly English department in the universities was being rendered identityless, because nobody would want to know anything about literature at a point of time where there was just a simple need to know about the machines, and the people did not really have time to focus their energies on something that made no sense to them, because people were looking at utility aspect. At this time, it was imperative for the people of English department to prove their identity in the face of such rapid development of science and technology. It was a competition that was there between English department and other departments which were science oriented. It was a competition between the teachers of science and the teachers of English literature. It was then that F.R. Lewis came up with his notion of a text. His notion of a text on the basis of language. And what is important for us at this point of time is understand what Lewis meant by his recommendation of practical criticism. Point number one, the responsibility of creating literature lies only with a specific minority of the society. He declared it unhesitantly. He declared it unhesitantly because he had such predecessors before him or behind him who had made such recommendations. And when we are talking about F.R. Lewis, we also have to talk about three very important, eminent personalities of English literature: William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, and Matthew Arnold. These authors, who were practicing writers themselves, also were critics themselves. When we talk about these poets, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Matthew Arnold, they were not only critics, they were basically practitioners of literature. And there are prose pieces that are very interesting written by these three eminent people of English literature. Lyrical ballads, when Wordsworth wrote lyrical ballads, he wrote a preface to it. He wrote a very interesting preface to it by talking about how to read literature and what actually matters in literature. And this becomes the major route for new criticism for us, because Wordsworth, in fact, speaks only about the employment of language. He never speaks more about literature being a powerful aspect of the society which can mirror the society itself. He had absolutely no intentions of giving literature some extra scope. Instead, he adhered to the language aspect when he spoke about what kind of poetry that he wanted to produce. And he made very clear-cut recommendations about how language has got to be employed, and he speaks only about the emotional quotient and the emotional component of any poetry. So here, when we talk about poetry, it in fact is nothing but the expression of some powerful emotion in a very creative manner by the authors. And here, Wordsworth is making it very clear to all of us that anybody, whoever reads literature, has to focus all his concentration and attention on the analysis of the language. So Wordsworth, in fact, pioneered the craft of reading poetry by way of placing extra emphasis on the use of language, which again makes it clear to all of us that literature, in fact, was very much similar to or was very much comparable to language itself. And literature, in fact, did not really have to be a major tool for bringing about some change in the society. Instead, it had just one small function to perform, and that function was to give a kind of an education to the people in language studies. So Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads pioneered this, and it was followed by Coleridge as well, who wrote a work called Biographia Literaria, wherein Coleridge also speaks about the use of language. And because these two romantic giants spoke so much about the use of language, the others like Matthew Arnold also stuck to the same thing, followed by another major poet called W.B. Yeats, who came up with a poem called The Second Coming. Try to understand this. When Matthew Arnold spoke about culture and anarchy, he speaks about something called sweetness and light and all. And all these passages have got more to do with something called pure literature. And quite understandably, any work of art or work of literature has to contain human experience. We all know about it. Nobody can write something without giving expression to some experience. Any write up for that matter has got to contain a human experience. But according to Matthew Arnold or Wordsworth or Coleridge or even the new critics, this human experience will be given expression to only by a minority. And what they write, in fact, has got to be read by the rest. And this is where a special privilege is given to something called literature. When we talk about power, or when we talk about unity, or even when we talk about centrality, let's see how it works. If it is only one particular writer who talks about human experience, can we really consider that to be authentic human experience? And this is where the questions emerge for all of us. If we consider just one person to be an authentic writer who represents all of us authentically, then there is a problem in our understanding of literature. Try to understand the departure that I'm trying to arrive at in the course of my talk when I talk about new criticism. In the meanwhile, simultaneously, I'm also trying to draw your attention to the problems that are embedded in the new criticism proposed by people like F.R. Lewis. When you want to give a special privilege only to some people to write about human experience, what are they going to write about? The answer given by Matthew Arnold here is they represent something called culture. They represent something called culture. And when the writers represent something called culture, it is supposed to be understood as genuine personal response of a person who had the expertise to give expression to his human experience. And this is where things become problematic for us, because literary studies, in a very traditional sense, was giving way for the construction of something called canonical tradition. Don't forget this word, canonical tradition. Canon, in the sense, the book for you to read. If you understand it in a very simple manner, the word canon refers to a book which is supposed to be treated as the book for you to study. Supposing you want to talk about maybe in Indian literature, if I want to use the term canonical literature, it's almost like it's almost like making R.K. Narayan or Mulk Raj Anand or Rajarao mandatory authors for all of us to understand, because they are part of the canonical tradition of Indian writing in English. And this is where things become problematic for us. The word canon is the problem. The word canon. And all written pieces were not literatures. Whatever you write cannot be treated as literature. You had to use certain tools to produce literature. That's why it requires a lot of expertise. Because you have a pen and because you are slightly literate and because you know the language, it doesn't mean that you can be privileged to simply produce some literature. Anything that you write cannot be called literature. Literature has specific requirements. And for us to be in a position to construct a literary work, we need to be experts not in observing our experiences, but in using the language creatively. In how many ever pages that I write, there should be metaphors. There should be a lot of figures of speech other than metaphor. In the meanwhile, I should also adhere to something called the form of literature. The form of literature. So, when we talk about literary studies, we normally talk about the Russian formalism. How important it was for the writers to adhere to something called form. And any meaning that you want to arrive at has to be arrived at only by way of adhering to the actual form of the text. It is the form that emanates some meaning. And these new critics simply replicated what the Russian formalists had recommended. There is no other meaning in a text other than what the author tries to express. And when it comes to the faculty of imagination, this also has to be directed by your expertise in language. It's not that all of us are born with the faculty of imagination, according to the new critics. You can be considered to be imaginative enough only when you are heavily creative in the use of your language. So, all our understanding of literature rests in the understanding of language. There's no discount in this particular area. You have to understand only the language. It is the language that matters. For example, if we have to understand what purity means, all of us in fact have read Kuvempu. We'll try to understand how Kuvempu has to be understood. Most of the critics of Kuvempu have made plenty of comments on Kuvempu's use of Kannada, Kannada language. Forget what he has written, but what matters to most of us today is how Kuvempu wrote. And Kuvempu belonged exactly to that particular tradition called the Navodaya tradition, which in fact was almost replicating the tradition of the new critics in England. Lot of emphasis on purifying the language. And Kuvempu takes it as his personal responsibility to give some extra edge to the use of Kannada by way of making Kannada sound very, very pure to the reader. And what he wrote, in fact, comes to our notice only at the later stages or later stages. But the primary understanding of Kuvempu for most of the critics is in the area of language, Kuvempu's Kannada. And when they talk about Kuvempu's Kannada, when they talk about how Kannada was bettered by Kuvempu with the use of a lot of Sanskrit words, people pay a lot of credit to him because he made Kannada sound very rich. And in the meanwhile, simultaneously speaking, his son, Purnachandra Tejasvi, did not follow suit of his father. He simply digressed from his father's way of writing, and he in fact simply embraced the Navya tradition without much of hesitation. In Tejasvi's works, you don't find extra emphasis on the use of language. People like Tejasvi actually consider language or the language only as a facilitator which has to only help you to express your human experience. But for people like Kuvempu, what matters is the language itself, because it is a kind of a language education that these guys were doing for all of us. In literary studies, it was all about language education. According to the old timers, language education. People have to be given information about the language, and they have to be given some treat of a good language. Treat. And when you give them a treat of good language, you are also trying to enhance their taste for language. So the responsibility of any author here is to enhance the language of the reader. And this was done magnificently by a writer like Kuvempu. And how does research happen, especially when you want to stick to this kind of literary studies? How does research happen? I'll give you the example of a work by U.R. Ananthamurthy in the first half. And in the second half, we will talk again about the same text quite differently. There's a work called Bharatipura, which all of us have read. Bharatipura. The first impression all of us would have about Bharatipura here is, it is a work that perpetuates secularism. And Jagannatha becomes a very admirable character for all of us, because he works really hard for the well-being of the Holaya community. And U.R. Ananthamurthy's work Bharatipura is a significant work in his time and even now for this particular reason. That is, he created this significant character called Jagannatha, who works for the well-being of these people who belong to Holaya community. He is supposed to be an educated person, and the setting of the novel is very traditional. When we talk about somebody being educated, we also consider that educated person to be enlightened as well. Enlightened in the sense, somebody who would not stick to tradition, somebody who would be modern enough in his understanding of his own surroundings. And here Jagannatha becomes one such typical character who would have done his studies outside his town, and when he comes back to Bharatipura, he is appalled by the mindset of the people there. He is appalled by the mindset of the people. And if Ananthamurthy becomes the subject for scrutiny for any researcher in the traditional sense, anybody for that matter would stick to simple analysis of this particular book. I repeat, if you want to work on Ananthamurthy as your subject for scrutiny for your PhD degree, normally you will stick to some simple analysis of this particular book, because there are specific components in the book which offer themselves for such scrutiny, because the scenes that Ananthamurthy creates in fact are very significant for our understanding of the very society we are living in. And in the traditional sense, when you do literary studies of this particular text, you become appalled by, you become appealed, you will be appealed by the very fact that there is so much emphasis on secularism in this particular work. There is so much happening in this particular work. But the question that I have here is, if Ananthamurthy were to write maybe some 100 years back, would his work be considered as a readable work? Because the kind of criticism he comes up with about the caste system in India would not actually go well with the readers of those times. Because we all belong to some kind of a tradition where we did not know that we had to question tradition. It was Immanuel Kant who actually mentioned it to all of us that there is nothing in this world which is beyond criticism. There is nothing in this world which cannot be questioned. Everything has to be questioned, everything has to be criticized. Despite Immanuel Kant's strong recommendation for criticism of everything and everybody, still there was something called new criticism which emerged and which spoke about purity of a literary text. There are so many contradictions in the very history of England, where you have one person like Immanuel Kant on the one hand and one person like Matthew Arnold on the other hand, who both talk about the construction of an ideal society but in two different ways. According to Immanuel Kant, the ideal society can be constructed only when you question. But Arnold speaks about sweetness and light when there is no question, but when there is only adherence, there can be sweetness. And this kind of contradiction now comes into picture when we take up a book like Bharatipura by Ananthamurthy. Would he be considered as a writer in those times? On the other hand, when we take up a writer like R.K. Narayan, he of course excels as a writer because he simply replicates an ideal society of the middle class India, and he simply represents what actually is supposed to be treated as universally Indian. When a writer does not violate the common sense of the people, then he can be treated with respect. The moment a writer becomes slightly outrageous and he violates the common sense of the people, then he becomes questionable. This is exactly what happened in the case of Taslima Nasreen or even Salman Rushdie. Both actually spoke vehemently about the religion. If they had written about their religion in positive terms, they would be regarded as the best writers. And this is how tradition works for all of us. A good writer is the one who adheres himself to tradition, and this is exactly what was propagated even by T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot also mentioned about tradition in the same sense as Matthew Arnold. All these writers speak about continuing or the continuation of the tradition. There cannot be any scope for the violation of tradition. The moment you violate your tradition, your society is gone. The moment you bring about certain contamination to your tradition, then the major loss that we are going to suffer is the loss of something called purity. Purity. Understand this? When a writer writes anything on his own in order to mirror his society in a very realistic manner, it would amount to contamination of literature. Contamination of literature. And the writers like Wordsworth or Coleridge or Matthew Arnold, when they engaged in the art of criticism, they made sure that the readers would understand only what is written, and the readers did not really have to go beyond the text. It was all the tradition of Christianity. And the same thing happened to all of us as well here in India, who are part of this colonized nation. We go by the colonizers' recommendations, because of which even today we still think about literary studies as something pure, which has got to do with language study. And when we talk about the syllabuses and when we talk about research today, you will always find yourselves to be in some kind of a conflict about the search for a proper topic. And normally, for all of us, the regular topics that occur to all of us are analysis, scrutiny, or appreciation. But unfortunately, such criticism or such research no more exists. We are departing from such kind of literary studies. And what is happening today here is something completely different, where literary studies has been completely morphed by cultural studies. And when we talk about literary studies being completely morphed by cultural studies, what we are witnessing here is there is nothing like literature being produced only by some minority of the society. Anybody can write, or everybody can write. And another very interesting change and an important change that happened was the change in the form. Change in the form. Form in the sense the people started to construct their own forms. And this also has some history. What we are now looking at is something called a departure from new criticism towards reader response theory. New criticism, though survived in universities for a long time, did not survive for a long time for one reason, and that is there was a new school of thought that was formed by a set of people who were led by certain specific writers who represented not English literature but other disciplines. There were people who represented philosophy, there were people who represented history, and these writers started to come up with their own theories about literature. Literary criticism had actually been produced by several people in the past, all right, but then when other theories were produced by people who were not producers of literature, suddenly there was a change in the paradigm of the reading public. So, when we understand this particular narrative of literary to cultural studies, we are looking at a paradigm shift. And in this major paradigm shift, what we actually understand is the people who were adhering to the mode of faith were transitioning towards the mode of enquiry. So there was a recommendation now by other writers who belong to cultural studies who were talking about something called popular culture. Popular culture. So try to understand this. Matthew Arnold spoke about culture. Matthew Arnold spoke about human experience. Even T.S. Eliot spoke about culture. All these writers, in fact, were very vociferous about talking about culture. But what kind of culture were they talking about? And what did their culture actually consist of? According to them, culture was something that predominantly dealt with art, literature, and music. There was there was no other component in the culture that they were speaking about. It was all about art, literature, and music. In case you wanted to bring in other components into the realm of culture, then you're not talking about culture. It was all contradicted and opposed by people like Stanley Fish, who wrote a beautiful work called Literature in the Reader. And this initiated something called reader response theory. So try to understand the shift now. We understood that it was the author who mattered in the construction of meanings in the traditional sense. But people like Stanley Fish, who was also accompanied by others like Bakhtin and Foucault, mentioned about meanings being produced by readers. So we are looking at multiplicity of meanings in a literary text. Because there are numerous meanings hidden in the texts, new criticism and its recommendations to a large extent were sidelined. And literary studies, from being a linguistic analysis of literature, completely shifted its focus towards knowing more about what surrounded the literature. There was not some substantial meaning only inside the text. The people started to understand that there were meanings around the text. So now in this entire narrative, I want you to focus on the shift towards linking the text with its context. Otherwise, the new critics had recommended decontextualizing the text. But people like Stanley Fish spoke more about placing a text in a particular context to arrive at more meanings. Then started the era of understanding literatures through the application of theories. Through the application of theories. We are no more living in the world of literatures. We have now become part of the world of theories. In Kannada, we call them Sankatanas. And these theorists spoke about the societies in which they were living by considering the history of their societies. Try to understand this. New critics had spoken about dehistoricizing the text also. There are two things: decontextualizing the text and dehistoricizing the text. When you want to understand the text, you don't have to worry about the history of the author. You have to simply know what is there before you, and the words will give you the meaning. But the School of Cultural Studies recommended the placing of a particular text in its cultural context. And the cultural context encapsulates history, politics, even economy, anything that is part of your culture. That way, now when we talk about popular culture, it is called the mass culture. And what matters in this mass culture? It is not simply art, literature, and music. In the mass culture, anything that is part of your life is part of culture. Anything. Anything. Anything that is part of human experience can be brought into the realm of cultural studies. And in mass culture, we don't simply talk about music or art or literature. And in cultural studies, we don't think about literature being produced only by the minority. We are now looking at the production of literature by a majority of people who have multifaceted experiences of the society. And we don't really now have any scope for authorial meaning. We have a lot of scope for the meaning created by the reader. And this actually was initiated by Stanley Fish through his work called Reader Literature in the Reader. Literature in the Reader. So this will be the first part of the talk for you.